Madam Chair, you are live.
Thank you. All right, at 5 o'clock, I am calling to order the October 17th meeting of the Finance Committee, and if we could get a roll call, please.
Madam Chair, you are live.
Yes, thank you.
Okay, hold on, just in case we weren't really live the first time. I am at 5 o'clock, it's still 5 o'clock. I am calling to order the October 17th meeting of the Finance Committee, and if we could get a roll call, please.
Certainly. Counselor Cassett,
Here.
Counselor Lindell, Counselor Rivera, Counselor Villarreal,
Present.
and Counselor Romero Worth.
I am here.
You have a quorum, Madam Chair.
Terrific. We're going to go to approval of the agenda, and I'd like to make a motion to move the consent agenda before the presentations. So we'll do approval of the consent agenda, and I believe there's one item we're going to discuss, but I'd like to hear that item before we roll into our presentations. So moved. So we have a motion from Councilwoman Villarreal and a second. All those in favor, aye. Anybody opposed? Anybody abstaining? All right, terrific. Now we're going to go to approval of consent. Councilor Lindell, I think there was an item you wanted to hear tonight.
Can I just proceed? Or am I pulling the item?
Just you need to pull it and then we need
Okay,
to
Can you
approve.
tell me what item number it
It's
is?
6B.
6B, please.
Okay, anybody else have an item they'd like to pull tonight? If not, is there a motion to approve the consent agenda as amended? So moved.
Second.
We have a motion and a second to approve the consent agenda as amended. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed? That motion passes. Okay, so we are going to start with motion, item 6B, which is a request for approval of art in public places, purchase contract with the State of New Mexico Department of Cultural Affairs, New Mexico Arts Division, and Christine. Oh, well, actually, you're not Christina. Rob. You're not even listed on here. So welcome and take it away, Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. My question is, and it doesn't have to be specific to this particular purchase, but for these purchases, are we contractually obligated to show these pieces and to show them in the place specific? Are we contractually obligated to show in this location? And secondly, are we contractually obligated to show them?
It's on when that little red light's on. Looks like you're live. Try talking.
Madam Chair.
There you go.
Madam Chair, members of the commission. Yes, this contract came about as a result of the bond for the construction of the bathrooms on Water Street. And so that bond money is coming to us via the state of New Mexico. Their sister version of the Arts and Culture Department is the New Mexico Arts. And they have an Art and Public Places Committee, and this contract is through them. We followed their process, which is where they have kind of a catalog of pre-existing artworks that then we can go with our balance from the bond and actually select from that list. So we had a committee of 7 people who reviewed the entire catalog, and in consideration of the amount of money that we had possible, then they selected an artwork for this specific location, and the bond money ties specifically to that location, and the display of it is, I'm assuming, included in that contract as well,
So
or
what
that
if,
site.
so what if 25 years from now, we want a different piece of artwork there?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, I presume that if there's a problem with the building or if we want to change it around, that there is a way to possibly go through, since it will be in the public art portfolio for the city, that it will be able to be transferred from there to another site. I don't think it's through forever.
Well, I'm concerned about that. And I'm also concerned to know that if our portfolio of public artworks, if it can be rotated to different places? And secondly, can at different times, different pieces just be stored?
Madam Chair, members of the commission, I presume that the initial contract is probably for a set amount of years. I haven't actually researched that topic, but then if it can be moved, yes. But I think that the funding itself is specific to the site. And I know that public artworks typically have a shelf life or a life of 10 years minimum. And so at that point, I think there's flexibility about the maintenance, care, movement, storage, and that kind of thing.
I need to be sure. I appreciate your opinion on it, Rod, but we've had problems in the past because we didn't have these kinds of things nailed down and we weren't sure about them. And you know, you don't need to look it up now. It's going to come to council, but we need to have that answer. And whether you go to legal to find out or where you go to find out the answer to that, we need to know that, because we've had problems in the past with people claiming rights that they really didn't have, or perhaps us disposing of pieces that we shouldn't have been disposing of. I make no opinion on either one of those. I'm just stating that we need to be very clear about that, and we need to be very clear with the public and the artists about it. You know, we have a pretty sizable portfolio of public art, and you know, do we have the ability to rotate locations, and do we have the ability to put certain pieces at different times into storage? So we need to have those answered. I think that's all I have, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from the committee? Is there a motion?
Move to approve. Second.
There's a motion and a second to approve this item. It sounds like we are going to need some more information down the road, but all those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Anybody opposed?
I'm going to abstain, Chair, until I get that information.
Okay, so we have one abstention and that motion does pass. Thank you. Okay, I should have mentioned this at the top of our work tonight. We have a hard stop at 7:15 tonight. We are going to leave. My plan is we're going to spend about an hour on the Midtown moving forward and an hour on the audit preparation. And then I don't see that the audit update is going to take much time. I don't think there's much that we're going to be hearing about that we didn't hear about last week. And then we have a quick introduction of legislation and it's 5:10. So I think we'll have plenty of time to get the presentations and have the committee be able to ask questions on both those items. So I believe, let's see, we moved consent up before presentations, and then there's introduction of legislation. So we're going to go to the first presentation, which is the FY21 audit update. And looks like we have our finance director, Emily Oster, and then our audit chief accounting officer, Ricky Bejarano. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Good evening, councilors. Not a lot, and as you mentioned, not a lot to add to what we've already been told last week. Just wanted to go over a few of the items. CLA continues to work on audit prep and accounting catch-up. They're currently working on rolling forward items from 21 and reviewing them to make sure that they're good for audit when the auditors do come in. I've had contact with the auditors. The PBC list, so to speak, it's an acronym for provided by client, will be issued to the city probably mid to late November. And at that point, we'll know what items need to be pulled for them to start work in December. And with that, I stand for questions.
Director Oster, did you have something you wanted to add?
Yes, thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I have a couple of follow-ups related to the audit. I wanted to report to you that we are beginning the process to close the month of September today. Today is our deadline for month-end close in the Munis system. And I have some updated vacancy stats. I know there was a question on that in relation to the audit. Finance currently has 56 fillable positions. 15 are currently vacant, which puts us at a vacancy rate of 26.8. However, we have 4 positions in the post-interview stage. And if those are filled in the next couple of weeks as expected, that'll put us at 19.6%. So I was a little off on my estimate last week, but we're closing in on 20%. And that's all I have. And we're happy to stand for questions.
Terrific. Questions from the committee? Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Ms. Oster or Mr. Bejarano. In past audits, I think some of the groups were complaining that they weren't getting information in a timely manner, or some of the information wasn't available to them. Have we worked all that out? Are they getting what they need in a timely manner?
With regard to the external auditors themselves, assuming
Yes.
we're prepared to get everything to them in a timely manner. So we're good to go. The actual request, as I mentioned, the PVC list will be issued mid to late November. And at that point, we'll know exactly what they want, and the timeline comes along with it as well. It'll actually give due dates, and we'll be able to go into CRI's system where we upload things. It gives us messages that such and such is due by within a few days, and then we upload them in there, and then we actually get a synopsis every week of what's due, what's been turned in, and whether or not it was accepted by the auditors to be audited.
Okay. And are we, is everything at your fingertips there in Munis, or like with SWAMA or BDD, are we having to have them extrapolate numbers and send them to you in a different form?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, BDD and SWAMA are audited separately.
Okay.
And so we'll be depending on them to provide the information to us to upload into the system or the Connect system.
All right. Any other departments that may be in that situation where you would have to reach out to them for specific information?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, we actually will have to reach out to all departments. For 21, all the information is in the SureLink system that our EDW had and gave us access to. But there are always additional questions. For example, they may review certain work papers and they'd say, okay, well, we'd like to look at the support for these lines in more depth. Or there's always additional information that's requested throughout the audit.
And the last question, with federal grants or state grants, I guess, are we, again, all that information I assume is readily available, or have departments been kind of handling their own grants so that they don't run into any problems?
For the 21, I'm sorry, Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, for the 21 fiscal year, we believe we're ready and good to go. For 22, there's still some assimilation taking place with CLA, and most of that work will be done throughout the next few months to make sure that it's audit ready.
All right. And then someday doesn't have to be today unless you've had plenty of opportunity to look at it, but the end of month closeouts, have those been working out pretty well, or have we run into problems?
Madam Chair, Councilor Rivera, we are closing by hook or by crook, as I've mentioned before. What's needing to happen is then departments sometimes have to do extra entries because they didn't get their information in. So it goes into the next month, but departments are cooperating. It started out as, it was a rough start, and I've mentioned that before, but departments are providing stuff more and more. This time, the first month, we had 40 items that we needed for departments to close. I just want to give an example. This month, we only have 4 items that were just hanging in the system. So we're actually ready to close actually this evening.
And then with the old system, every department was entering a contract for, let's say, Big Joe. So you had multiple contracts with the same organization. Have we fixed that up? Is it a problem with Munis, or is it not an issue?
Madam Chair, Council Rivera, I don't believe that would be a Munis problem, but I can check if there's some specific contracts to look up. All contracts do go into the Munis system and are required to go through there. And there may be multiple contracts. I'd need to know which contracts they are.
Well, I think it was an issue with many vendors. There were so many vendors listed by different departments that used them that at the end of the year, you had the same vendor listed 150 times, something like that. So I don't know if this is still an ongoing issue or not.
Madam Chair, Council Rivera, I can look into that and see which ones they were.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Any other questions from the committee? Thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Okay, we are moving on to our first of two big presentations. We will set aside an hour for this. If it doesn't take an hour, great. If it does, then that's what we have. So Midtown moving forward, economics of land development at Midtown presentation series in 3 parts. This is the second presentation. If people are interested in the first one, it was at our last meeting of the Finance Committee. So this is the second one, and then we have a third one scheduled for Halloween night. Director Brown is here, and I'll let you introduce folks on the screen here. But basically you have 15-20 minutes to make your presentation. That should give plenty of time for counselors to ask questions.
Great.
So
And
I'll let you take that away.
thank you, Madam Chair. We were hoping to do the presentation in 5 and then have some extra time. If I can ask Alex to put this screen up, I just have the presentation on the HDMI here. I don't share screen or not. Oh, yeah. Yes, yeah. You. Good evening, Madam Chair, members of the council. Thank you for the second appearance for the Midtown Land Development and Land presentation. As you know, we are on October 3rd, and we took your feedback and have sent you an updated presentation. It should be in your PrimeGov. In the interest of time, we're not going to redo that presentation, but we'll be more than happy to answer your questions at the Q&A or at a one-on-one if you would like to have further answers, because both the folks who are on the tonight, Dina Belzer from Strategic Economics and Daniel Hernandez from Proyecto on the project management team are here tonight and can answer questions that you may have on that revised October 3rd presentation. So tonight's presentation is about the next steps. Whoops.
Okay, I just wanted, so for folks who may be watching the October 3rd Midtown Today, the current financial status, that presentation is in PrimeGov for tonight's meeting, revised based on comments from this committee. And then the presentation that you're doing now, also in the packet for tonight's meeting, is the October 17th Midtown Tomorrow, costs for Midtown redevelopment and management.
Yeah, Madam Chair, that's correct. And we
Okay.
had a revision and we sent it out. We posted it and then we sent it out via email to
Right, but the one that's in the packet now is the revised version for
Exactly.
tonight
This-
as well.
the final one. That's
Okay, I
correct.
just want to be clear for everyone. Thank you.
Sure, you're welcome. So tonight's presentation is the phase 2. As we said, we have we're 3 separate presentations. We have we wanted to break them up into 3 parts, and so tonight's presentation is about the costs for redevelopment and management. And so today's agenda will be about capital improvements, public infrastructure needs, source for capital for the projects, and future operation and maintenance for the parcel. So tonight I'm going to invite Ms. Belzer, Dina Belzer, and Mr. Hernandez to take you through the presentation, and then we'll be ready for any questions that you may have. So I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Belzer, but I will run the slides. Thank you.
Great. Thank you. Good evening, everybody, Madam Chair, members of the committee, and I'm glad to be back to you for this second night. As Director Brown said, tonight we're going to be talking about infrastructure and public facilities. You'll have to wait to the 31st to really dive into the private development piece. But there's so much information associated with each of these topic areas, which is why we broke it into smaller bites. So I want to start out by talking about how we thought about infrastructure and incorporated this into the master plan. One of our key objectives was to be efficient in the way that we used existing infrastructure in the site as a way to be as cost effective as possible. So we wanted to know exactly where the existing water, sanitary sewer lines are located in order to be able to understand how they relate to the major road improvements that will be made. And when I talk about major roads, I'm talking about the white lines, primarily the heavy white lines that are within the blue boundary on this diagram. Here, these are the major infrastructure streets or roads that will be operated and maintained over the course of the life of the project or in perpetuity as public streets. We also wanted to understand where the parks and plazas would be located, and then understand how we could, again, set up the road infrastructure and the block locations to both optimize development, but also work as effectively as we could with existing infrastructure. What we want to avoid, or what we want to have happen, is that the roads the right-of-way roads will be aligned with where all the infrastructure is located, so that no trunk infrastructure is located underneath a privately owned parcel or a parcel that's being used for some kind of community facility or activity. In doing this work, we did also look at the electrical system, but have concluded that this will require further study and will likely be completely rebuilt. The parks and plazas that you see, those locations were selected primarily to work from a planning and urban design perspective and to be responsive to the community's concerns about having adequate community gathering places and the kinds of green amenities that we heard about in all of our public outreach. Next slide. So we wanted to start out by understanding the condition of these systems and to begin to get, again, a handle on the relationship between where the infrastructure asset or system is located and how that may or may not be related, again, to the layout of the streets and parcels, who's going to own and be responsible for this infrastructure, and then finally what the condition of the infrastructure is. The water system is currently already being rebuilt, and it is in good condition. It's been assessed by an engineer, at least at a very preliminary level, and all that work has also been reviewed by the utility department. The water system will need to be realigned in some locations, but the system does not need to be rebuilt. And in some cases, we adjusted where the road alignments would go to be sure to be over the existing water trunk system. The sanitary sewer system is in fair condition and does need some near-term improvements. However, these near-term improvements are relatively modest compared to what the cost might be if you had to completely rebuild the system. The streets are in fair condition, but the network is incomplete and will need to be built out again in response to the master plan as development occurs. And stormwater improvements will be built both in the public right-of-way in the streets through rain gardens or other ways of managing stormwater runoff, And then individual property owners will also be responsible for stormwater accommodation on their own development sites. There are to date some open spaces on the campus, but they have not been improved as public spaces. And then the community really wanted a community gathering place. So we've included a plaza similar in scale to the plaza that currently exists in Santa Fe, and that replicates this particularly New Mexican precedent from other communities. Fiber optics are a critical part of the economic development aspect of the site, particularly for the film industry. What we find is that the fiber optic system is already exists. There is already a fiber optic loop on the campus, and it is attached to every building that is on the campus today. Fiber optic is very easy to upgrade over time. What you need is the conduit or the container in which the fiber optic cable or the is situated, and then as you want to upgrade that, you can pull new cable through the existing conduit. And there are already some switching facilities that are being built out on the campus. So the campus is already well positioned and moving forward in terms of the upgrade of the fiber optics network. And this is happening in conjunction with the private sector. And finally, the electrical system is in fair condition. In initial conversations with PNM, we have concluded that there will be a lot of transitional work that will need to occur as part of this process, but that will be done in conjunction with individual property owners, individual developers, and will happen over time. I want to add that one of the key decisions that was made for the Midtown site is that would it be primarily an all electric site, and that the existing gas infrastructure would not be rebuilt or replaced. This does not preclude individual property owners from bringing gas service to their property. However, they will have to work that out directly with the gas company. That it will not be part of the trunk infrastructure that will be provided as part of the building out of the Midtown process. Next slide, please. It's also very important to note that the infrastructure investments will be made in conjunction with development. And you can see here, we're showing where the phase 1 development is anticipated and where phase 2 is anticipated to occur. But these are, again, still fairly large chunks of land and development opportunity, and it could easily be broken down into multiple phases. Phase 1 is best positioned to take advantage of existing infrastructure that's already in place and to provide opportunities for affordable housing to go forward quickly, again, without having to make any upgrades or any significant upgrades to the existing infrastructure system. What you see in orange on the phase 1 are development blocks. These are not necessarily individual development parcels. And of course, in phase 2, those are also blocks, not just individual parcels. And the dashed green lines that you're seeing in there are conceptual connections and streets that will all be the responsibility of developers. So again, the idea is to very closely phase infrastructure with development. So again, what we're showing you tonight, the numbers that you'll see in a minute, this is all at a very high conceptual level, and much more engineering and planning will be required as the development process moves forward on the campus. However, we do know enough to be able to say that existing buildings that are involved in the early disposition RFP process can all be served with existing infrastructure. Next slide. Thank you. We are showing you costs here. These are very, very preliminary costs. The water and sanitary sewer costs were done as part of the engineering assessment The road costs were calculated based on normative costs as the city is currently experiencing. The civic park space was based on some current costs that were taken from other comparable projects in New Mexico, but these are all very high level. This is, again, not an infrastructure plan, and no detailed engineering work has been done. So we just wanted to get sort of a rough order of magnitude for these costs. We added, you'll note between what we sent out on Friday and what we're giving you today, we did add a phase 1 cost for moving some transformers. And in a minute, we'll talk to you about where that funding might come from. But we were also trying to gauge what this rough order of magnitude cost might look like. And as you may recall, when the master developer came in asking for a subsidy cost, they were asking for about $30 million. So what we're looking at here is well in the ballpark of that. However, I think these are probably very conservative numbers. So I think that this is just something to kind of start to get our heads around these numbers. Next slide, please. So where will funding and financing come from to pay for these? And when I say funding, I mean revenue and money. And when I say financing, I'm talking about borrowing money. So we can't borrow money. We can't take out a bond if we don't have revenue to pay that bond back. So we have both funding sources and financing sources in this diagram. And then there are multiple sources that can be used for each system. So the water and sanitary sewer can both be paid for through federal grants, through state legislative funding, through bonds that might be repaid out of general fund revenues. Developers will most certainly be contributing on all of these systems, or at least on sanitary. They will contribute on electrical, on water, and most likely on roads as well. And the proceeds from land sales also can be used to pay for these costs. And some of this may be an issue of timing, where the city may use bonds to pay for some costs in the early phases of development, and then the developer contributions will reimburse the city for those infrastructure improvements over time. You'll note that we do have a parking garage on here now. We showed that also, we'll show it in the earlier slide. We show that the city, if the city did decide they wanted to pay for this, they could pay for it from these various funding sources. But at this point, there's no intention to add a parking garage, and there is no plan to pay for it. The assumption is that it would only be built if there was private sector interest in it today, but that could change over time. So we just showed some of these potential funding sources, given that the city has paid to build parking garages in other locations. Next slide, please. This slide just tells us very quickly who will be responsible in terms of building out these systems. And we want to be clear that the public utility, in the case of most of these systems, or the Public Works Department, will oversee construction, will do all the plan review and check, and that the water and sanitary sewer, stormwater, the roads, the parks and plazas, those will all be publicly owned in the areas that I was showing on the previous diagram. But then the developers will pay for their own lateral connections for water and sanitary sewer. They will be responsible for streets and circulation within their own development sites. They will be responsible for their stormwater retention and mitigation. And then the electrical system will be built out again by PNM in conjunction with the developers as well. So it's very important to note that developers will be responsible for certain things. The city will be responsible for others. In some cases, developers might build out public infrastructure and then dedicate it to the city, but all of that work would be supervised by the Public Works Department or the public utility or some combination of both. Next slide. So it's very important to note that the public infrastructure that will be built at Midtown will be beautiful, we hope, but it will also be expensive to maintain. So we've been asked by community members and by staff, by you all over and over again, who's going to pay for the ongoing operation and maintenance of Midtown? And it's very important that we start to think about this question now, because there are several actions or activities that the city can and probably, that the city can take over time to address this question. So the first two sources of funding are a public improvement district and property-based tax increment financing. Both of these are important because they would both be generated by the site itself, and the funds that would be generated by each of these sources would be specifically dedicated to Midtown. So the public improvement district is a special form of taxation. And this is a commonly used tool in New Mexico for paying for the operation and maintenance, again, of public infrastructure. And it's a way for property owners who benefit from having this high quality infrastructure. Helps contribute to the value of their private development. So this is a way for local government to recapture some of the value that government is creating in the first place by building the infrastructure, so that the cost of maintaining that infrastructure is split between the public and the private. Property tax increment is a very specific form of increment. What this means is that property tax values for the Midtown site would be frozen at some level, and then as those properties gain in value, some percentage of that incremental increase in the gain in property values over time would go into a tax increment financing fund, and in New Mexico, the way the tax increment as financing is used, it's best applied to this kind of operation and maintenance of the site. In some states, tax increment financing is also used for capital improvements, but that is less well suited to the way the tax increment financing is structured in New Mexico. Santa Fe charges a stormwater fee. It's a monthly fee that everybody pays into. This fee is specifically for supporting arroyos and open space in the city to, among other things, mitigate certain kinds of runoff. But there is some portion of the Midtown site that could be funded through this stormwater fee. So we're still confirming that that's the case, but we don't want to discount it either. Now, one of the things that we'll also be talking about on the 31st is that over time, Midtown will create additional property, bed tax, gross receipts tax revenues. All of that revenue will go into the general fund. It's possible that the city could decide that it wants to set aside some portion of that revenue to pay specifically for Midtown. This is a very tense and charged conversation, I understand, but it is something that should be considered over time if the city is really committed to not just the construction of Midtown, but also the long-term ongoing operation and maintenance of the facilities that get built there. And then there are other sources that could be explored later. For example, some of the proceeds from the sale of land could be placed into some kind of a fund that could be maintained in perpetuity, and proceeds from that could then be used to pay for operation and maintenance. That's not a typical structure, but it's something to consider. Next slide, please. In terms of implementing the master plan overall and building out this infrastructure, it could take 5 years, it could take 10 years, it could take 15 years. And we want to be really clear that funding and financing will happen incrementally. It will also be opportunistic if federal legislation like the recent infrastructure bill are passed again, and there are grant revenues or other kinds of federal funding that the city can go after. That's an opportunistic opportunity to hop in and pick up some money for Midtown. Otherwise, more conventional sources will be pursued, including legislative grants from the state. But this will all happen with full public transparency, as has happened in the past with other infrastructure improvements in the city. The Economic Development Department will continue to oversee plan implementation and be tracking market cycles and knowing when funds are available to move forward. The Public Works Department and the Public Utility will continue to manage the capital improvement construction project, again, overseeing and working in partnership with private developers and following the design and development standards that are in the Midtown Master Plan. The governing body will be making all final decisions regarding both property disposition, funding sources, financing mechanisms, and the pace and type of future development. So how much of future development is balanced between affordable housing and market rate housing? How much debt does the city want to take on to pay for certain kinds of improvements? Excuse me. What the timing of property sales will be. All these decisions will continue to be made by the governing body. If the city does decide to move forward with the creation of a metropolitan redevelopment agency, then the MRA itself could be the operating entity for maintenance and operation of Midtown, using the revenues from the various sources discussed above. Again, Albuquerque uses this tool very effectively for managing sort of the ongoing activity in its many MRA areas. And we think that that is something that should and could be considered. So I'm going to pause here and see if any of you have any questions that I can answer or topics that you would like us to, again, provide more information in terms of a further revised presentation like we did for the October 3rd presentation.
Okay, thank you. Rich, are you ready for questions?
Yes, Madam Chair, we're ready for questions. I just want to say thank you to Ms. Belzer.
Yes. And welcome also to Daniel Hernandez, who's beaming in from places yonder. We have about a half hour. We're going to go to questions from the committee. Councilor Lindell.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you for the presentation. Let me start out with just some basic logistics on almost every page.
Okay.
I can't read these maps. They're not big enough.
Oh. Okay.
So let's make them, if the
Enlarge.
map itself has to be a whole page, make it a whole page.
Okay.
Because they're not readable. So let's run through a couple of things here. On page 6, what will new infrastructure cost and when will it be built? We have civic parks and open space, 2.6. Phase 2.
Mm-hmm.
Why does that not go into the total?
So the total of the.
Oh, that's a great question.
Oh.
Yeah, it should.
Yes, 6.9.
Yep.
Well, I know that you did a revision on this page and you rounded up the numbers in
Right,
the last hour.
right,
but-
right. Yep. Thank you.
Okay, next page, page 7. Did some minor changes on this in the last hour or so.
Mhm.
My question is, why on here would we not check under developer contributions to roads, civic parks, open space, and this I'm not sure why we put in the parking garage. We're not sure about the parking garage, but why wouldn't a developer have a contribution to those three? I can't understand why a developer wouldn't have a contribution to every asset on this list.
Right,
Madam
the-
Chair, go ahead, Ms. Belzer, go ahead if you want to answer first.
Yeah, they could.
Well, then let's get it checked.
Yep, okay.
Yes. Point taken, yes.
Okay, page 8. Why don't we put the parking garage on there?
Yes, we can add. the
We're going
parking
to talk about it.
as a TBD,
Let's
yes.
talk about it.
Okay.
Okay, great.
Page 9. Stormwater fee
Mhm.
for Arroyo on the Midtown campus site to be confirmed. This seems very, very minimal to me. Is this really how we expect? Is this a real funding source? I mean, what's the amount of money that comes off from a stormwater fee specific to that campus? It's probably not much. I don't know if it's a real item or not, but I wish that you would look into that.
Yeah, we will look into that further. Go ahead.
Okay, page 10. No one wants to hear this question. I don't even want to hear it. Have we done any contingencies or run any other models looking at what many in this country, many in the world predict for our future, which is a recession? I mean, let's not act like that's not a possibility. It is.
Mhm.
And
Madam
the
Chair,
recession,
Councilor.
the recession of 2008 had very, very, very dramatic effects on the city. And for us to be charging forward and acting like that storm cloud isn't potentially on the horizon doesn't seem like good planning to me.
Madam Chair, Council Lindell, that you're correct. That's why it says market cycles. So we are definitely looking at market cycles. And on the ED side, we're looking at all potential development partners, people of interest, companies of interest, sort of getting a pulse on that. So you're correct. We don't have a spreadsheet that says what happens when I call the earthquake from what we had in COVID. But it is something that we need to consider moving forward because infrastructure has to happen first, and you need that subsidy financing from that standpoint. Right now, we don't have bond capacity, but that's one way. But we are looking at where are the market cycles from developers who could be interested in purchasing parcels.
Okay, one final comment on the cover. The map that's on the cover. I don't think that that's the best map to be using.
Okay.
We have a road there running directly through College Plaza. I know that it's just a drawing, but it connotates something. So let's stop using that.
Okay, we will do that.
That's all I have, Chair.
Thank you.
Other questions from the committee? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair. Just a quick question about, well, just trying to understand the funding sources, the revenue sources that you described.
Mhm.
I guess I'm trying to visualize what that looks like for the city to oversee all these different, not just funding sources, but methods of taxing, et cetera. I guess how does that get organized? Maybe from a financial point of view. If you have a special, what do we call it?
PID or TIF?
Yeah, a PID or a TIF.
TID, we would not do a TID here, we would do a TIF.
TIF.
Okay. Right. So what does that look like for the city to? I mean, I guess that really falls under finance department. And so you have all these different revenue sources and tax options and structures. And I guess I'm just trying to understand how we keep track of that, since we've never have done that before. We have something similar, which is not similar, but we have a model that we use at the rail yard, but it's, you know, it's unique, it's different. And we've had problems with that, just trying to figure out and organizing ourselves with, in partnership with another entity. So I'm just curious, have we thought about a good way to handle the structure of these multiple revenue and funding sources so that we keep track of that? I don't know if that's like way in advance, but I guess I'm just trying to think of how we do that. Because when I read them, I'm like, oh, well, that sounds good. But then how do we organize ourselves internally to prepare ourselves for this kind of new models that we've never really worked with? So maybe I'm thinking it's really big, but it feels really big when I look at all these options. So I don't know if you all have talked about that yet.
Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I just was reminded by our Director Wheeler that all of our capital projects have this type of multi-capital stack, multi-funding source procedures and processes. So we get ICIP, we get bond funding, we get developer interest, we get roadway assessments, I forgot what they're called. So all of these types of funding sources are already in a lot of our capital projects now. So this is just a newer capital project that we have. And what we're looking at here is that we're just expanding some of the opportunities. There is opportunity funds. There is an MRA district that would manage some of that. But we do currently have this type of financing infrastructure going on with a lot of our capital projects as we speak.
That part I understand. I guess I'm just trying to think of these special tax or district taxes, and
Yes.
I don't know how we get involved, like
So,
how the
well,
city would have to structure a fund or something.
again, I think that this is something that would require further study.
Yeah.
The public improvement district it would be adopted through very specific guidelines that are laid out in state legislation. So a vote of the property owners is required. A vote of the governing body will be required. So there are a lot of steps to get to the point at which any of these tools would be deployed. Well, the first two. The stormwater fee is already in place. The general fund revenues that comes to you automatically, and then other sources to be determined later, again, would depend on if the city saw some other kind of opportunity. But that's basically the process there. And there are very specific mandates for how these funds would be accessed. I will add that the public improvement district is a taxing district, whereas the property tax increment, the tax increment financing district, that is a set aside. That's a portion of city's revenues that would go into that would not go into the general fund, but that would be specifically dedicated for operation and maintenance at Midtown. So the implications of these top two are very different. One is the property owners pay, and the other one is essentially the city pays, but the city is committing to pay over a period of time, over a number of years that for which the district is going to exist.
And Madam Chair, Councilor Villarreal, I would also add that from a staff standpoint, it would be finance, ED, legal. We'd probably get the county involved. And we'd have probably public works involved because they'll be helping with the development. So internally, those 5 departments, I think, plus the county would be involved in creating these TIF and PID districts. And also if we then decide to come to the governing body and create a metropolitan redevelopment area, that whole group is responsible for this sort of financing options. So it'll be a sort of a separate group that comes together to work with the 5 that I just spoke to you about.
Thank you. yeah, I guess it seems like a lot. I know there's different pieces. They all kind of work together. Obviously, the city, there's, I guess because we haven't really talked about that. I'm sure you all have, but
Yeah.
it just seems like a lot. I think let's see.
Madam Chair, I think Ms. Oster would like to speak on.
Chair and members of the committee, I agree with Rich, and I will say that there are people that are experts in this type of financing, and we would certainly need to engage their services as well as working together as a team. But there are people that specialize in this type of financing.
So we would have to hire consultants to help us with this.
Possible outside counsel, possibly, yeah.
Okay.
We do it for our industrial revenue bonds. We do it
Right.
for LIDA projects, so.
Got it. And then the other just observation with the last presentation that you all updated. The only thing I didn't see updated was the current operating expenses matrix. You all had said that contracts started in fiscal year 18, but it still reflects 0. So I don't know if there was a reason why you kept it 0. I remember we were talking about how contracts started in 2018 and that I had pointed out that it didn't reflect on this spreadsheet. So if you could just look at that again.
We will, yes, thank you.
That's all. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor Cass.
It is on, I'm sorry, yeah, it was updated in one place, but not in another. So it's updated in slide 10. So we'll pop it into the slide 8 as well. No, it's on slide 8. I'm sorry. It's also in slide 10.
Let's see, I might have.
Okay, we're gonna move on. Counselor Cassett.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Quick question about the PID. So essentially how I'm understanding this is it's a additional tax on the district to assist with operations and maintenance. My concern about that, and I'm curious if this has been solved in other areas, is as we're looking at a district that's going to have a floor of 30% affordable housing and how that increase in that tax could negatively impact individuals that are living in these affordable units. And just to understand that balance a little bit more, and if there is a way to really address that, because that's something that I know we're all very concerned about.
Madam Chair, Council Cassett, I'm going to ask Ms. Belzer if she could speak on the definition of a PID and how it actually works.
Yes, it's a very timely question, because the PID, you could think of the PID as being similar to a homeowners association fee, which is charged on top of the mortgage that homeowner pays. And so one way that can be addressed is that the subsidy for the construction cost of the unit is increased, so that the payment for the home buyer who's buying that subsidized unit is lower, and so that the full payment it includes the PID cost. Does that make sense? So that that when you're factoring in how much a particular homeowner can pay, you're not just looking at the repayment of the loan at a certain, as 30% of their income, whatever the income level is, but you're including in that 30% cost the payment of the PID as well.
Okay, thank you. And I know that we've had this conversation around HOAs as well with our Santa Fe Homes program. So I imagine that we do also have some tools and models that we can look at there.
I'm sure that's the case.
Yeah, and Madam Chair, Councilor Cassett, so Albuquerque and Las Cruces are currently using PIDs.
Mm-hmm.
Just use PIDs more than out, but we can definitely get you some white papers on how to address that.
Okay, That would be wonderful. That'd be great. Thank you. I appreciate that. My only other question has to do with kind of as we're looking at the ongoing role, this is a development. We're really looking at, 64 acres in the middle of our city that we are planning and developing. The one department I see very absent from a lot of this is land use. And I feel like they would be important, not just in, the rezone application, everything that we have going on there and the initial master plan development, but also kind of in the ongoing development and monitoring. We have talked about Midtown as both a master plan that is set but flexible. I mean, and it's, kind of this really fine line that we're walking with making sure that we are continually to stay aware of what is happening in the community and how Midtown fits the needs of the community. And I know that economic development is under community development and land uses as well, but I just noticed that land uses is incredibly absent from a lot of this. And I'm not sure if that's just because of the conversation around financing or but it slightly concerns me. So
Yeah. Madam Chair, Council Castle, that's a good point. And it's basically the answer that they are involved in front end as it relates to the zoning, and then necessarily get involved. But once the development starts, once the disposition starts to happen, so you wouldn't really see plan land use financing arm of it. You probably might see PID and TIFs. They wouldn't necessarily be involved in any of the financing from that standpoint. Infrastructure.
okay, thank you for confirming my hope that that was the case. I have no further questions, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Councilor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. With regards to the maps, I agree with Councilor Lindell. Even if you enlarge them, you can't read
Okay.
anything on there. So that would be helpful.
Sure.
Also, just if I'm just the regular layperson, I'm reading this and I look at slide number 4, which talks about the infrastructure assessment by asset, and everything says good, fair, fair, good, and then 2 more slides down at a cost of 26 million or so. So that doesn't jive to me. It doesn't look like that's really fair and good infrastructure. It looks like it's going to need a lot more investment. So I don't know how you want to handle that, but it's just a comment for me. Maybe it's just me, but that's a pretty hefty price tag, I think. So the last thing with the PID, and I think that for Miss Belzer, you said that the property owners vote on the PID, but the city's the property owner and it wouldn't be sold in phases. So how would people vote on it in phases?
Right. So that's an interesting question, and I would defer to legal counsel on that. But one way that is addressed is through the property disposition process, that when someone acquires property from the city, they also agree to enter into the PID.
So it would have to be voted on by whoever.
That's right. So you're absolutely right that this is sort of a tricky piece of when it would be voted on, because when would you have property owners there to vote if the city owns? And we'll have to explore that issue in more detail in terms of the legal ramifications of that. But in speaking to people who are state of New Mexico funding and financing experts, my understanding is that it's possible to do.
Right. Will you include that information, Rich, in the white
Yep.
paper? You're
Yep,
gonna.
absolutely.
Yeah.
That's all I had, Madam Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, Counselor. I just have 2 quick questions. One has to do with roads. So, and I'm looking for, oh, here we go. So you said the city would build the primary streets and the developers or private property owners would develop other streets. And I guess what comes to mind is that I have a couple of streets in my district where that's what happened, and then they need maintenance, and and then the issue is they have to bring up the street to our standards in order for it to be dedicated to us, in order for us to take over the maintenance. So are we going to require that those streets from the get-go be built to our code, to our standard, just to alleviate that, or how does that work?
Thank you for the question. We make all developers develop to city code and then they dedicate the roads to the city. That's how regulation occurs. It's a rare and unusual situation where developers develop private roads on purpose and then leave us with this situation. And so that would be what we'd envision, is that the developer will submit a development plan specifically for the site, and it'll include roadways and it'll meet all city standards. And then that infrastructure will be dedicated to the city when they're complete.
Okay, that's helpful. Because again, I do have a couple issues in my district where I guess those are examples of that rare instance. And I guess going back to Councilwoman Villarreal's question, I think your question was essentially like, how do we stack the revenue sources for whatever it is we're trying to do? And you're saying that all of this will be done incrementally, so we'll take that on piece by piece and look, I mean, will there be like a grand plan, or is it really going to be more piecemeal?
Madam Chair, I think the answer would be that it's more peaceful unless we have some master developer that shows up and says, I'm going to buy the whole 64 acres. And then there's a whole development and financing plan that go with it. But if you looked at the slide, this small slide here, it says, phase 1, phase 2, these are blocks that are parceled out for disposition. So the financing from that or the infrastructure for that would either be paid by that chart that we showed from our standpoint. So it is parcelized instead of just one massive financing that happens. So the major spine we do, and then the rest is smaller that gets parcelized.
So the funding might be stacked by phase then, I guess.
That's correct.
And each phase identifies a certain portion that is going to be worked on.
Right, correct.
Okay. All right. That's the only couple questions I had. Thank you.
Sure.
I think, any other questions? I think we are right on schedule, and appreciate the help of everybody keeping us on schedule. So thank you.
Thank you very much.
All right. Moving right along. We are now going to item 5C. Audit preparation and financial close assessment as of June 30th, 2022. We have Stephanie Woodruff here, the founder of Pinion Ventures LLC, and our finance director, Emily Oster, to be co-presenters in walking us through the executive summary that is in our packets. I think we had said we're doing 15 to 20 minutes, and then that'll allow us, a good chunk of time for counselors to ask questions. And I just want to welcome particularly Stephanie Woodruff back. Haven't seen you in a while, and to see you in 3D, not on the screen in your box. So thank you for being here tonight, and we'll let you guys take it away from there. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair and members of the committee. I will give a brief introduction for Stephanie, and then I will hand the presentation off to her. He brings over 35 years of public and private sector experience, from startups to global publicly traded companies and Big Four consulting. On slide 3 in your packet, there is a list of her extensive experience that she brings into this project. A summary of the project scope is on slide 2, just to refresh your memory about how did this project get started. And with that, I'll hand it over to Stephanie to dive into the executive summary.
Great, thank you.
Thank you, Director Oster. Madam Chair, Councilor Lindell, Councilor Cassette, Councilor Villarreal, and Councilor Rivera. It's good to see everybody. It's been a while, so thanks for having me this evening. So let's get, so you have a copy of the presentation. As Director Oster said, we're going to walk through the executive summary. And then at the back of the presentation are 11 observations. And I call them observations because the scope of the project was, while I was helping manage the FY21 audit and also laying the groundwork for FY22, it gave me an opportunity to review from the processes, systems, and structure, why the audit continues to be late, and to make some observations. So just to clarify, there was no or deep dive testing because it wasn't within the project. So because the project ended in June and now we're in mid-October, we did have an opportunity with the new director on board to kind of sit down and say, okay, from these observations were as of the end of June, and then we were able to give a management's response as of the end of September, so September 30th. And also with those responses, we were able to sit down and go through a lot of that, but once again, not a detailed review of those responses. I do recommend continuing this this report within the internal audit function to make sure that any risk or any observations can be followed up later on in the year. So all right, let's get started here. So the on page, what is this page 4 on the executive summary, I thought it was important to really start from the beginning. When you think back at 2017, all of the issues that this administration and the finance department and as a finance committee had inherited. You remember back in 2017 with the McCard report, really identified 3 key issues: failure of the internal audit function, failure of the external audit function, and the lack of proper internal controls. Also in that year was the first year that CLA did the external audit. And at that time, there was a qualified adverse opinion. So that's kind of where we were starting at ground zero in 2017. When you go to the next slide, I view this as kind of a 5-point star, right? From 2018 to currently in 2022, you've got finance, you've got internal audit, you've got human resources, you've got IT, and you have all the operating departments, community development, community health and safety, public works, and public safety. And all points of the star really are responsible, right, for all of the information to ensure that the fiscal year-end financial statement audit is complete, right? So what is important to understand that all of this responsibility does not just fall on the finance department. And I think that is some of the challenges over the last 4 years, particularly with the staffing challenges. We've had anywhere from 20 to 40% vacancy rate. We had the pandemic that really threw, I think, everybody in a loop in terms of how work gets done, how departments are communicating. And then you had, the overall economic downturn and the pressures. So a lot has happened for the last literally 4 years that I've been doing this. If you look at, the first year that Mayor Weber came on board in 2018, when he took office, the city had been working on a lot of systematic improvements. There were improvements made to the financial accounting process, improvements made to internal controls, and the overall financial statement audit. The audit in 2018 was on time, and it was an unmodified clean opinion. So that was really the starting point where we were at the end of 2018. Moving on to 2019, that was the first year that I came on board as the chair of the audit committee. With that, then we had selected REDW as our internal audit partner for a 3-year contract, and started putting more structure around that process to do ongoing internal audits. We did a procurement internal audit, accounts payable. And once again, that year, even though it was delayed, it was a clean, unmodified opinion. A big part of that delay was this was the first year that the Tyler Munis system was implemented. And as you remember, that implementation took a couple of years, which is quite large when you're looking at all the different modules and the different processes within the city to execute and modernize the city with the Tyler Munis system. Now, moving on to FY20, we were in the pandemic. We were able to form leads and audit with the new GASB 87 rules coming down the pipe. And once again, though, with all of those challenges, even though it was late, we were able to get a clean, unmodified opinion. So that audit was delayed. We did communicate with the OSA and actually with the finance department where we were at. And that audit was issued in August of 2021. Now moving to the next year, FY21 is currently where we are at today. The audit, to my understanding, with the new finance director had just said that that audit had just kicked off with the new external audit firm, CRI. There's a lot of pre-work and planning that takes place with a new firm. Also in that fiscal year, we completed a public utilities and utility billing audit. We did an audit of the police evidence room. That was just very recent. And then there's 2 other internal audits with IT and payroll human resources that have yet to be finalized and presented to committee. So a lot of work that was done in addition to, all of the work, the consulting work to prepare FY21 audit and that delay. So moving to the next slide, I think this is really important. When I stepped back and looked at everything that was happening, all of these issues, from my professional experience, I really feel that this is more of a system issue that creates an accounting challenge, right? When you have a new ERP, enterprise resource planning system that touches finance, accounting, HR, vendors, it's huge, right? And the implementation was, probably not the best. It was, it is what it is. That's common. I also own a technology company in Cupertino in Silicon Valley, so I understand technology. So not only a 35-year accountant and audit professional, but I've owned a state-of-the-art SaaS, software as a service, in the financial transparency space for the last 15 years. So, technology to me is the enabler. It enables organizations to be more modernized. It enables organizations to have better decisions, data-driven decisions. And you'll see later on with the findings, there are a lot of operating systems still within the city that are on their own systems, like parking, utilities, airport, courts. I mean, I can go on and on. And payroll, Chrono system. None of those systems are integrated with Munis, right? Because we are first addressing Munis financials and HR. And once the city gets that, they're in the middle of this big upgrade. Once they're able to get that and address a lot of the planned and potential integrations, it will make this process and the financial statement audit a lot smoother. Like I said, even though the audits have been late, the city has a solid financial foundation. The financial health of the city is solid, right? You're in a net positive position. For FY21 was 13.5 million. You've obtained clean, unmodified opinions in FY18, 19, and 20, and you've had excellent bond ratings from both S&P and Fitch. So strong budget management, proactive fiscal management, which I believe is really what is at stake and what is important versus the rhetoric and the, what you read in the paper, particularly what was just in the paper again this past week. And that's really my next slide when I talk about, we step back and say, okay, what are some of the lessons learned? Not necessarily on my project the last 6 months, but I'm looking at the last almost 4 years that I've been in this role, once again, as an outside independent director, a volunteer, non-paid. The amount of rhetoric and the amount of, information out in the public that just isn't true, right? That has got to stop. That is just absolutely has to stop. It's not productive. And it just creates a narrative that is just not true and not healthy. It kind of, it's frustrating when I read in the paper where statements say that the financials are in disarray or the financials, mismanagement of the financials, and that is absolutely not true, right? You have the budget, you have decisions, you have processes, right? And then you have systems that are challenging that. And then you have the audit, which I always told the former finance director, I don't care, from my perspective as the audit chair, I always said, if we're going to be late, we're going to be late, but we're going to get it done right. And there aren't going to be any material misstatements, and we're going to get clean opinions. And that's exactly what we did, right? So if you look back over the last few years, right, and if you look at the observations in my report, they're all, in my mind, system related, because it's a lot of work to implement, right? When you're taking a city like Santa Fe and you're modernizing it, right? You're taking every process from POs to vendors to payments to payroll to HR to hiring to how accounting entries are booked. Everything goes from, an old JD Edwards E1 system to a more state-of-the-art Tyler technology is a like $1.5 billion organization out of Texas. They are the best of class when it comes to municipalities. All of the several, modules and the vision that the city made the decision, I think it was back in 2016, I think, when the decision was made to implement Munis, and it does take time. Now, the challenges with the upcoming upgrade, right? So, and that's, it's not that the city is making the decision to say, oh, let's upgrade right now. This is perfect timing. Let's do it. We are forced into this upgrade because the version that we're on, 2011.3, right, is expiring. So the challenge from going from 2011.3 to 2019.1, you're jumping from 8 major versions of a software, right? So there are major changes, and that is what's going to be so critical to ensure the success of the finance department and to ensure that the audits get back on track. But that is something that we don't have a choice, right? That actually, I think initially it was supposed to expire actually in October, and it got pushed back to January. So that is something that, my last slide on the executive summary, when I talk about moving forward, more work needs to be done to improve the finance and the IT department. This upcoming Tyler Munis upgrade that is supposed to happen, I think, the 3rd week of January, and the further activation and implementation of all of the modules, integration is so key to the success of the city. And the third point is just a no-brainer here, with the additional staffing and training should contribute to an on-time, timely audit. So that's all I have on the executive summary. I'm open for questions. I know, like I said, there are 11.
Thank you for the work you've done, and both as audit chair and then taking that experience and looking more deeply at what is happening, what needs to happen. I believe Director Oster, you had said at the council meeting, there's a lot of work that needs to be done in the next 6, 7, 8 months. There's a lot of work that's been done. And I think this gives us colors that statement in a little bit, particularly when you start to look at your observations or recommendations, you can really see the level of work that I think Director Oster was pointing to last week at the governing body meeting. So certainly appreciate what you've done. Questions from the committee? Councilwoman Villarreal.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Ms. Woodruff, for your presentation. Maybe staff can answer just a couple questions for me first structurally, just so I can understand what we were given. The document that's in our packet material, this is just a slide summary of the overall I guess, report that you all received, right? Is there a separate report or is this the report?
Madam Chair and Councillor Villarreal, this is the report.
Okay, this is the report. And then the other question I had is, it says that it was completed in June, but then there's these updates from as of September 30th. And is that staff's updates? It was provided this September 30th?
Madam Chair and Councillor Villarreal, because I was new coming into the city, Stephanie was gracious enough to spend some time with me and meet with me. And as we went through her observations, I was able to report that progress had been made.
Okay.
Those updates were added.
Got it. Okay, thank you for that. I think when I was looking at not the old, but the entire scope of work. And although you listed some of the scope of work pieces here of what you were charged to do, a lot of it in this presentation was kind of more around IT structure. But then when I was looking at the old scope of work, it was really focused on trying to coordinate with the audit preparation process and then coordinating with all the different contractors. So I didn't really see that in here.
Yep. No, so there were two components of my project. The first part was, I think the role or the proper title of the role was audit coordinator. So my role was really managing the 4 outside consulting firms. So REDW, Beasley, JAG, and Sloan. And when I started in the second week of February, it was the exact same date that the new chief accounting officer and I were literally attached at the hip from mid-January through the end of the project, when everything kind of fell apart at the end of April. So my role, because of the amount, we had a big spreadsheet of all of almost 5,000, give or take, accounts that had to be reconciled. And really every single account in the city, whether it's from the courts, parking, airport, all of it, cashier. My role day to day was tracking information down. So this is what I talk about with the role of the department. Class down the road, the way it should work. And if you look at the 10-step process, all of that work would be done daily, whether it's, and I'll use parking as an example, because I think that's let's say and this is actually true. I got a parking ticket a few weeks ago, right? It was a wine and chili, I think, on Friday. So I first put coins in the meter. So that's a revenue stream. That's a system. Then I'm out shopping fun and I hit my mobile app to add more time to the meter. That's another system, right? That's another revenue stream. And then I get delayed because I'm having too much fun and I walk back to my Jeep and there's a parking ticket. So I'm like, so there's, another revenue stream. The next day I have to go log into the citation system, right? So it's 3 different systems just for parking for that revenue stream. Those systems do not integrate with Tyler Munis, right? So part of my role in the audit coordinator was literally helping across the entire enterprise citywide, tracking down information in the departments. And we had assigned the 4 consulting firms, right? That you're going to do these accounts, track this down, reconcile it, make sure that it's all of the revenue, all of the, the ins and outs tie, and then take that information, funnel it to, for that team, it was REDW as the consultant that did the lead and do all of the post entries, right? The journal entry that would then come back to the city reviewed it. They said, yep. Okay, this journal entry had maybe 500 line items on it, and then it would get posted into Munis, the actual system of record, right? Because none of those operating systems, whether it's airport, courts, parking, all of it, utilities, they're all separate because none of those integrate into Munis financials. So just coordinating all that, I had a massive spreadsheet of all the accounts and literally every day working with the chief accounting officer, where are we at? Where is this information? Where, who's doing it? And then, that's then when we got down to end of February, we realized that cash was bigger than we had expected just because of the way it was mapped into and set up in Munis, right? There are several bank accounts, but the way it was set up, the bank accounts were aggregated. So it's not a 1-for-1 where you say, here's how we pay this, comes out of the account, rolls up, and how couldn't easily reconcile it, right? And this is where we were still in the process of reconciling it, even though we handed it over to the external auditors and it was in the exact same format as the year before. Everything was exactly the same. And when all that fell apart, then it was like everything was put on hold. But I literally worked. We had no day off, not even a day off since mid-January to help manage all that, to track all that down. And that was a big part of my review. So when I was doing that, it gave me the opportunity to see first observations or for some reasons why audit to address. So
I think what I'm trying to understand, because when I look at the scope of work, the coordination was a big piece of it. And of course, observations about how to have the flow go better or more efficiently would be obviously one of the things you'd focus on. I think what was hard reading this and then saying that, like looking at the important note, this scope of this review did not perform any detailed testing and they're only observations, but there's specific things that it's talking about that directly are connected to IT. Were you interviewing and connecting with IT staff to understand where the disconnect was?
yeah, so I literally every department head, I had like a series of questions to understand how their role impacted in the financial close process, right? So my scope always related back to how airport, how public works, utilities, IT, how all of that, their role in reconciling and ensuring the data would funnel up to finance for the financial statement process. And what I realized when I really stepped back and said, because of all the disparate systems and integrate, make or find to just say, at the end of the day, you just push a button and you say, yep, let's reconcile cash. Because that's what an ERP, that's the beauty of an ERP. Or you say, okay, let's reconcile or let's payments for out of Chronos, right? So all of these disparate systems that, and if you look at one of my observations where certain decisions were made not to integrate when Tyler Munis was initially implemented for certain reasons, those areas will be looked into after the upgrade to say, okay, let's start now addressing how can we integrate these systems so that the data flows up to finance, so that when you look at the trial balance, you say, yep, we have all the entries, all the three systems in parking or the utility billing system that another big consulting group manages, or airport, or all of these different systems, or accounts receivable. The accounts receivable module was never implemented, and the grants with the not grants, the capital asset module was never, it was implemented, but it was never really turned on. So now we have to start over from that. So just to do capital, to look at, okay, what is the working capital? What are the capital assets, right? We had to take just the payment file, and there were 350,000 line items for the year of just payments, payouts, whether it's payroll, whatever. This is a payment for. So we had to take that data and literally mine it. And this is what Beasley did. They mined all that data to say, okay, out of all of the, the AP, the payment file for the year, 350 line items, these are the items related to the acquisition of a capital asset, right? And so then we were able to say, okay, checking all that, tying that back to the actual asset, the depreciation schedule, and then saying, okay, this looks great, and then booking it into Munis. That's an example where a module, right, relating to IT.
I
right?
guess I distinctly remember that finance didn't turn on certain modules, and they weren't willing to work on those modules within the Munis system. And so that's why there was these disconnects, and then there was these requirements for manual entries. And so I guess I didn't really see that in your presentation. There were specifically finance at the time didn't want to implement certain modules.
That's
They were there already ready to go. IT could have helped them with that, and there were reasons why there was pushback that I don't understand, but I
That's the
guess it's
first-
just hard to understand from this presentation that that's what was occurring, because we know that there were different
Yep,
there was different aspects of the technology that weren't fully implemented.
correct.
Um,
That's basically observation number one, manual processes.
And
So
I
basically-
think Director Oster might want to step in and give you a little bit more too as well.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, counselors. I first want to just acknowledge my colleagues in IT and recognize that both divisions have to work together, and all divisions of the city have to work together to facilitate timely and accurate financial reporting. As finance director, I will absolutely take responsibility for that. Financial reporting is a finance function, and it requires information and coordination from all aspects of city operations. And certainly in today's world, I don't think any of us want to go back to manual ledger paper and doing everything by hand. So Munis is our path forward, in my opinion. After my, brief time here, I can see that the upgrade of Munis will facilitate these interfaces that Stephanie is talking about that are so critical. The APIs with the Chronos system, with the public utility system, with the parking systems. And in order to get to a place where Munis can interface with these other systems, we have to do this upgrade, and that's what we're doing. And that upgrade is well underway. I think that the communication is critical, And I think there are always opportunities for improved communication, to your point. You know, I wasn't here when this report was largely being drafted, but I do recognize that there are always opportunities for better communication. And I look forward to working with my colleagues in IT on routine, on day-to-day matters, and also on the big projects like the upgrade and making sure that we're having robust communication. But really what I wanted to say is just that both IT and finance have opportunities for improvement, and we're moving forward with the upgrade. And that's a good thing. This is an evolution. You know, we're moving to a more advanced version of the system that will allow us to utilize the technology more robustly, implement additional modules that we're not currently using, and interface with some of these critical systems, like I mentioned, like the payroll system, and then also the utilities system.
Thank you. And Ms. Oster, can you also let us know, because there was information about manual processes that were still being utilized. So are there still manual processes that you all are having to utilize at this time?
Madam Chair and Councillor Villarreal, absolutely there are, and these technology enhancements will help us move away from that. But one of the challenges is that, you know, the city does still have a number of different systems that don't communicate with each other electronically. So that means that we're doing manual entries into Munis to transfer information. Once we get past the upgrade, one of the next steps will be to prioritize all of the different interfaces that we need. And I will say that the city manager's office has done a very good job of establishing the expectation that we will use Munis for any functions that it can support going forward. So we're really, you know, evaluating closely the need for additional softwares other than Munis and confirming that Munis can't provide what we need. You know, we're trying to use Munis for everything that it can. So
But there's
really, I think there's a danger here that this report, you know, could be viewed as IT, you know, having a role in the financial reporting challenges. And I just want to really, like I said, acknowledge that financial reporting is finance's responsibility, and IT is our partner in helping us be successful with the financial reporting.
Thank you for that clarity. And you said Munis can't solve it might not be able to be used for every single functionality. Is that what you're saying?
Correct. For example, as far as I know, Munis doesn't operate a parking meter module, for example. There are certain types of specialized software that will probably always be needed. Another good example is the public utility system. They evaluated whether or not Munis could be used in the future for the utility billing, and it was determined that the needs of utilities were more specialized. So they're moving forward with the advanced billing system implementation, which will then interface to Munis through an API. The ability to interface is critical, though. Currently, we have two systems, Munis and the existing utility billing system, that can't communicate with each other. So we have to do both of those projects to get to a place where we have that electronic communication between the systems.
If I can you just describe briefly what an API is for people who are probably trying to understand all of this jargon that we're tossing around a little bit? And since you just identified that as being a crucial link, could you just take a minute?
Madam Chair, thank you. So I am not a software expert.
Right.
I will defer to Stephanie. My high level understanding is that an API is an interface which allows communication between two different software systems. And I will defer to my expert for.
Yeah, and I don't want to take us down a rabbit hole or something, but it seems like, again, it's kind of something we should know
A
about.
system like Tyler Munis, which is, you know, like an Oracle, it's like a state of the art for municipalities. They already have APIs built for Kronos, because Kronos is the state of the art system for payroll. So you have to be on the X version, the latest version of Kronos to say, yep, let's go get the So you don't have to write code or to write an interface. You just go and get the API, you just literally plug it in, right? And it connects. So what's connecting then is, say, all that data. So all of the time and reporting and say the payments, right? And so that then you say, yep, that we're going to tie that to general ledger code, payroll expenses for, this department, right? So when it's mapped, you have to map it correctly to say, when we connect it, we want it to flow into this general ledger account, right? And so that's very easy. So all of those there are APIs out there that make it easy to integrate the various systems.
That's helpful. And sorry, Councilwoman Villarreal, I just thought we should clarify that.
Thank you. I mean, there's questions I have, and I guess it just, like, system inventory. I'm not sure why that was part of the scope of work, because it said that we didn't have an inventory of critical software systems, although I kind of remember that IT had presented to us at one point all this different software applications, and they were consolidating them. So I'm assuming, Ms. Oster, that list of software applications, that was something that was given to us, or I guess I just don't understand that status.
Yeah, so I mean, that is critical for finance, because if you don't know, because there's so many disparate systems, and this is exactly what happened at the end when we went to reconcile all of the payroll accounts. We didn't know how many systems there were, and it tripped us up literally at the last minute. So back in when I started to say, okay, what are all the systems that impact the financial statement audit that we need to make sure that we're gathering the data to reconcile how it should flow into the trial balance? There was no system, there was no inventory of all those critical systems and how they impact the financials. So that's where that observation came from.
And with regard to this finding and also finding number 6, I think there are some opportunities for improved communication, and there may have been some miscommunication about when this inventory was created. I have been told by IT that it's always existed.
Yeah.
However, at the time that Ms. Woodruff requested it, there was some sort of miscommunication. So I think that's an opportunity going forward.
Yeah, and I guess the software purchases, I don't know how that falls in the scope of work, but there is a section about an observation and about the citywide, and the departments can purchase software or various apps without approval of the ITT department, and how it makes it difficult for them. But I couldn't. Well, for one, I was trying to understand, well, with observation, how do you really know unless you're talking to the different departments that actually implement and support the software? And so that seemed incomplete to me. And then it also says that this makes it difficult for finance to reconcile on a monthly basis to prepare for year-end audit. So I guess I wanted to understand, how does that specifically relate to this issue?
Like I said, so let's say, and I did speak to all the big part of the scope was speaking with, I mean, you can ask Regina, Kira, Brian Williams, I mean, all the way down. Let's say, and now they've changed it. They've added, as part of the procurement checklist, they've added a line item that IT does now have to sign off on these software purchases so that they are made aware, and how this impacts finance. So let's say one of the departments goes out and just buys a new system and they're not aware of it. So it's not integrated. And so if they're not aware of it, how do they know that that information is going to flow up to the trial balance in the general ledger? I mean, so it's not, this is accumulation of years, right, of all these disparate systems and processes, right? And the slowly chipping away of, okay, identifying them all, identifying then the manual processes, seeing if we can do it in Munis, what's supplement, how can we integrate, what needs to be captured? Oh, that little system does that, but that's not a dollar amount that's significant, so we don't need to worry about it, right? So a lot of that is really sitting down and getting a bird's eye view that finance can say, okay, we know about everything. The court system, all the little systems in the court, all of that flow, right? That they have to do all of the accounting entries. And if you're not aware of all of them, because that data isn't flowing, so the finance director, it's hard for her to make really data-driven decisions because it's push versus pull. She has to pull for that information constantly. Where is it? Where is it? Where is it? And why the audits have been late the last few years is we get to where our back is against the wall and you're like, oh, we need that information from Buckman, or we need that information from the court, or I need that for the bail bonds. Oh, I thought they were going to do that. And then I got to constantly, pull that information versus it's integrated and it's pushing up to the finance department. And that's where we're going over time, but it's a process and it takes time.
So if we can, we have about 25 minutes left tonight. If we can share some of the time for questions from other counselors. I don't know how many more questions you have, and if we need to come back to this, we can do this because, yeah, and also, yeah, I think Stephanie's available for deeper dives as counselors are interested. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think some of the things brought up are things that finance already knew, and things they were working towards. I mean, we didn't have late audits in the past when I first started on council. I'm not saying it was perfect then either, but yeah, I guess some of the things that were brought up in this report seemed like it veered away from the scope, and there was like scope creep, because some of the stuff I think I'd want to hear directly from IT about how this could work better, what kind of software purchases make sense for us, the system inventory. So I guess that's where I'm having a hard time with the report. I think there's some important pieces in here that were good. The observations were good to bring to light. And then I think it was helpful for you to, I guess, staff to respond for the, status as of September 30th. It seems like a lot of it seemed to be, yes, we acknowledge this. Yes, we've actually worked on this, I guess it wasn't exactly telling me anything new. There was a few new things, and then you all kind of clarified. Yes, we've already done this. Yes, this is in process. And it really has to do with like completing the Munis system. And we all know that that's a bit large undertaking. It's multifaceted. It requires multiple departments and coordination. And I actually, I think it's going to be hard, but I have faith in the IT to make that a reality for us. And so I just wanted to say that there's a lot of work that's been done since this contract and before it. So I guess I'll stop there. I just think there was some things that I was wanting to hear more about with the coordination, because I really thought that was the main goal. But yeah, so I'll stop there. Thank you.
Councilor Lindell.
Thanks, Chair. I'm going to make a quick comment on this report that I've never really had the clarity of what we were up against until I read this report. And a lot of it, I don't think anybody's trying to put a dunce cap on anybody. I think that you were very gracious about IT, but I think that the bottom line of how this all operates now is part and parcel of IT and software, and trying to stop people from having to do manual entries. I want you to be able to push a button and have, ding, 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 there's the number. And this manual entry thing is fraught with problems. It worries me. I never was so clear about what we were facing until I looked at this report. And, 350,000 entries.
I want you to be at the, yeah,
Just
so
for- just
we're,
for-
we're having a little bit of trouble with that mic,
Yep.
so you really have to kind of
Yep.
be on top
Just,
of it.
just for capital assets to say, all of the data needs to be mined to say this is a capital asset or not in order to put it on the balance sheet, to properly record it into the accounting system. Because the capital asset module, right, was in this case, it was loaded. I mean, it was implemented, but never loaded and used, right? So that's one example.
I just want to amplify that point. It was implemented in Munis and the finance.
Come close to the mic, because this is an important point,
Yeah,
and
the-
you're fading
the
out.
Capital assets were loaded into Munis, and then there was a decision made to continue using the old system for capital assets. So that is not a system issue. That was an operational decision. And going forward, post upgrade, we're going to use Munis. That's the plan. But I just want to, call attention to that. That was an operational decision, not a technology decision.
Additionally, we've had great frustration with our utilities billing. So utilities billing has a system that I have no idea. Does it fit in? Can it shake hands with Munis? I mean, we just,
Yes, and yes.
okay,
Yeah,
good.
yeah.
It better.
Yep.
Because we've
This is
spent
a lot of money.
a bloody fortune on
Yep.
it.
Yep.
And it continues. And it seems like we have an IT issue there with software.
With Mountain
Um,
River and, yep. And looking at this, just kind of a side note, which has nothing to do with this report, but I highly suggest possibly council considering like an IT steering committee or an IT subcommittee so that you guys are more aware of the IT investments and the decisions, because I know that contract was kind of contentious about a week or so ago. But it's something that I think is a best practice that would further give you the knowledge to ask those questions, right? To ask those questions about all of the different investments and how, the city is utilizing all of the IT systems, because it's a huge investment, but the value is there. This is how you modernize city government, right? And another good example, we talked about capital assets, just cash, right? Cash receipts are still in the old E1 JD Edwards system. So all of that data, right, has to be manually entered, right? And this is why cash is such a challenge, right? Because of the different, in the illustration I just explained about parking on the revenue side, all of the different point of entries that hit cash do not allow the city just to push the button. Eventually you can, if you remove the manual processes, if you look at all the disparate systems, you integrate them, you implement processes with proper segregation of duties, then the ERP allows you to do those reconciliations and have those proper controls within the system.
So let me move on from that to how does this tie in with what we have been hearing a lot about, that we are closing monthly? What does closing mean?
Nope.
What does closing monthly really mean?
So that is a good question. And I caution everybody, the word close can be loosely used. So as you know, this is as Councilor Villarreal said, that this was an obvious observation in terms of a monthly close was not happening as of June. Now, remember back in, I think it was February, March, when the new chief accounting officer came on board and developed an excellent 10-step best practice for the month-end close process that was actually presented to you as finance committee, right? So steps 1 through 5 is really all of that groundwork in the department. So that's why it says all department staff. So it's courts, parking, utilities, airport, I can list them all. There's 20 different divisions, right? 1 through 5, the departments are responsible for that, getting the data, reconciling it, then we're forcing them to certify it. Then it goes to the finance department to review that, close, make those actual posting into the system of record, which is Munis, so that then the books can, what's called a hard close, an actual close within the system. Now, there are over 3,000, 3,000 to 5,000 trial balance general ledger accounts that need to be reconciled, at least reviewed, at least touched by the end of the year to say, okay, this is correct. There's all the support. This is, we didn't miss anything. So all of those need to be reviewed and touched if they are significant monthly. If you are truly going to be closing monthly, where you say all of the data rolls up, right? And you go back to that 5-point star where I say, every piece of that 5-point star, finance, internal audit, HR, IT, the operating divisions, every point of that star is critical to the success of the financial statement audit, that they have a role, that it cannot, at the end of the year, right, fall just in the lap of finance to try to do this. That's why you have a up to $3 million contract with CLA to do consulting services, right? To just do the ongoing work to get the data ready for the audit. So
I want to, Director Oster, did you want to add on there? And again, I want to caution everybody about time and just sort of length of responses and answers.
Thank you, Madam Chair and councilors. I think that when we presented earlier on the status of the audit, we mentioned that the close is happening in the accounting system. That's where we're at. We're training that behavior in ourselves and in others. And Mr. Bejarano gave the example of the first month, we had 400 transactions that were outstanding, and now we're down to 4. So a big part of this close process, as you look at these steps, you'll notice these are behaviors. These are things that we're training ourselves and all of our colleagues throughout the city to do on a monthly basis. And that kind of change takes time. Part of this is a change management conversation. We have to establish these behavior patterns and expectations and follow up on that. And we are making headway on that. Closing the system is a huge part of that, because that's when stuff gets deleted. I mean, that's when the rubber hits the road, having the wherewithal to say, yes, okay, we need to close, we need to move forward, and these transactions will have to go into the next month. And over time, those are the things that will train those behavior patterns to get us to a full 10-step monthly close, like Stephanie has detailed here in her report. Briefly going back to finding number 6, observation number 6, I just wanted to note one item that isn't in the September 30th update that I became aware of today, which is that the city does have a change management board and a review process for IT projects. So that was, I wasn't aware of that, but I wanted to note that. So the close process is a work in process, and we're getting there. We're moving in the right direction. We are closing the system, which is a critical step. It's a critical part of the process.
I think that I'm going to stop, Chair. I'm just going to make one more quick comment, and that is on page 30, the summary, the top 5. I think that I would just ask Ms. Oster if those are items that I think we need to be well aware and to whether it's every 3 months or 6 months. And particularly after the Munis upgrade, that we address these items and give us an update on where we are. I'm going to put a little tickler in my own calendar to send an email in 6 months and say, where are we on these? What progress have we made? Because they appear very, very important to me. And I'll close there, Chair. Thank you very much.
Counselor Rivera.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Ms. Oster, after hearing all this, and maybe it's just the timing of it all, but it seems frightening that we may not make our 21-year audit. And I hope that's not the case, but there seems to be a lot of moving parts in this. And when you have so many moving parts, it's hard to bring it all together. Am I justified in my thinking, or are you still?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, I feel very confident in our ability to get the FY21 audit done by June 30th.
Okay. I read in here about P cards, and P cards came along with the Munis system. They weren't implemented until then. We really didn't have them until I think Munis was implemented. So why were they taken away now? Shouldn't they be communicating with the system when Munis was implemented?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, I can start to address that question, and then Stephanie can add her perspective. Shortly before I arrived at the city, an effort was made to reduce the number of P cards in circulation. And the number was very high, 150 is what I've heard. And one of the issues with P cards is that there is the opportunity to circumvent a lot of our internal controls. You can use a P card like a credit card. You can go into a store and buy something with it without going through the process to verify that budget is available, or following the procurement code, following the correct process to procure that item. And the extent of the program, the number of cards that were in circulation was just really honestly beyond the ability of the finance department to manage and ensure that we were complying with all of the applicable requirements. So the decision was made, which I completely agree with, to reduce the number of P cards in circulation to only those that are truly mission critical for public safety, for example, and purchases that can't be made by another means. For example, there are certain types of IT purchases. iCloud is an example where they don't accept any other form of payment. You can only pay them by credit card. They won't take a purchase order or any other form of payment. So what we're asking of our partners in the departments is that they inquire with vendors about whether or not they would accept a PO or another type of go through a different type of payment process. We could still issue an electronic payment to them, just not through the credit card. And then one final thing that I will say on the P card is that once the charge is made, the money is essentially gone. It's not like a personal credit card where you decide when you're going to pay your bill. The bank just comes and takes the money out of the bank account. So addressing non-compliance with, for example, things like procurement code, or if there's not budget to support the purchases, is very difficult because it's done. By the time the charge is made, it can't be undone.
So are P cards being widely used by other municipalities still, or other places pulling them back as well?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, I can't speak for other municipalities, but I can say at the Taxation and Revenue Department, we had one P card for 800 employees. I think it varies, just depending on the operations of the agency and, the ability to administer a P card program in accordance with all the applicable rules and regulations.
I mean, I would hope that if we knew people were misusing a P card, that they would have been terminated immediately for misappropriate use of city funds.
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, I want to clarify that there hasn't been any evidence of use of P cards for non-city business. The issues that we've seen have had to do with lack of available budget and non-compliance with the procurement manual. So, I'm not aware of any instances where an employee has used a P card for a non-business purpose.
Well, that's good to know. And then one final question, maybe for either one of you. Capital asset or capital outlay disposition. We used to come to finance meetings, and police who just bought 30 vehicles would now be disposing of 20 of them. And I haven't seen anything go to auction. I haven't seen anything being disposed of for a while. So where are those assets? Have we been keeping track of them? And what are we going to do with them?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, that is the subject of discussion right now. We're in the process of reclassifying a position that will be responsible for the asset disposition process. In the instance of vehicles, you mentioned vehicles that are no longer in service. The fleet function falls under finance, and there's a yard off of Silo Road, and it's packed full of vehicles. I haven't done a complete inventory myself, but I went and saw it, and it's full of vehicles. So there hasn't been an auction, but we are in the process of planning for that. And all of the items are accounted for to the best of my knowledge.
So it looks like state police is getting ready to do one now, and we used to partner with them. Well, not state police, but the state at the state police yards. We're probably not close to being able to participate in that one.
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, we haven't explored that option, and we could look at partnering with the state. I know the Department of Transportation also does periodic auctions, and depending on the type of thing that you're auctioning, there could be partnership opportunities. So I can take that, and we can follow up and look into whether or not that might work for the city.
All right, and those other questions that I asked when you were talking about the audit were some of the things in the findings, like, not doing things by paper still, and the grants in those. So I assume that you'll keep up on those, and we'll hear about more as we go along.
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, we plan to continue providing updates on the audit progress at each finance committee and each governing body meeting. And I think that's an important communication mechanism for us to keep you apprised of the status and what work we've done since the last update.
Thank you. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Cassett.
Thank you so much. I will be quick. I think we've done a pretty good job really discussing a lot of this and a lot of the complication. What I'm really going to be interested in moving forward, I feel like I have a much better grasp of the root of the issue, and then kind of the pathway forward, where I think I could use some more clarity is really understanding these different aspects of the system. We kind of get this general, like, well, there's a whole bunch of different systems, and having that really spelled out and watching as those move forward as we continue to get these updates. So not just on, this audit, the 21/22 simultaneous audit, but really as we move forward with the general audit process of, what exactly is being upgraded with the Munis upgrade, and then where these manual processes are going to continue, and just kind of getting a play-by-play of those. I know that when we talk about our funds, it gets really complicated because there's 70 different funds, I believe, is the number that we frequently hear, down from 700. So that's great. And I don't know if there's a way to almost get a kind of a visual flow chart of what is communicating, what is not, what will be communicating, and how that continues to get updated. I'm just really trying to think of a clear way for both the finance committee as well as the public to see this process, because it is very complex. There is a lot of what's the word I'm looking for? Very specific language. What's the word? You know,
Well, it's a schematic, right?
yeah, it's
So
like
the-
very specific rhetoric to this profession.
Right, there is.
And so how we can really be tracking these pieces, because it sounds like that is the component that is really going to help. And it, from my understanding, is really what got us off track. And especially as we're going through the upgrade, I think having that awareness there and having even, you know, as Councilman Villarreal stated, the different departments potentially coming into the finance committee and talking about their financials and the changes that they have made, because that communication is key, and nothing like having to report to the finance committee is going to make that communication really happen.
Yeah.
So, you know, that there's that understanding that those collaborations are happening. So I will leave it there. I know that we will have more opportunities, and it is 7:15. So I really do want to thank you for this report, for this information. Thank you, Director Oster, as well. And we will, I do really look forward to kind of even more breakdowns as we understand both what went wrong and watching in real time as that is getting essentially fixed. So thank you.
Just a couple things. So this may be an oversimplification, but I kind of think of this like streetlights, which we've just experienced, right? So we are basically, this Munis upgrade is switching out the bulb of the streetlight, so to speak. So it's sort of, it's an upgrade. It's going to be better light. It's going to do more things. And then in terms of all the other systems that do accounting work for us, that's now we have these smart streetlights, and we can add more complexity to them, right? There are things we can make them smart lights, and we can do more things with them. And we add those components, and then we get smart streetlights.
Yep.
So this is kind of what's happening.
The bells and the whistles.
Yeah. So this is kind of what's happening, is we're replacing kind of the base system. And then that in and of itself is going to be a big lift. And then what the work of the future is to continue adding those different components and making sure that the things that don't have specific components have, what do you call them, APIs?
Yep.
So that they communicate with them, and you keep moving on in that.
Correct. So, I mean, to simplify it, back in 2019 and into 2020, the initial implementation of Munis happened, right?
Mhm.
So various modules were decided to implement. Some were implemented, not used. Some were we're not going to turn this on at this point. Decisions were made in the past, right? So then that version that was implemented 2019 into 2020, then you had the pandemic, right?
Yep.
So Tyler then pushed back what's called, when someone says it's going to sunset, it's like your phone, right? Your iPhone. Do you ever get those nasty messages on your general where it says you need to do the upgrade? It's going to happen tonight, but it needs to be plugged in. And if you don't do that upgrade, certain apps on your iPhone may not work because your phone may be so out of date, right? And if you have an old phone, like maybe an iPhone 6 or 7 or 8, and you're trying to upgrade to an iPhone 14, right? You have to do that critical upgrade, all of those versions. So the new bells and whistles on the latest iOS. Munis is similar. We're going from 2011 to 2019. The look and feel of it is going from more like static pages where you log on, you click on something to say, okay, I'm going to enter a PO, and then you may have to log on or click on certain pages to get there. The new Munis 2019 is what's called the hub. And so when you log on, depending on your role, your hub may look very differently I'm next to, because they're components that they have to work on. So it's more streamlined. It's easier to use, like all these things, right? Because you're getting 8 versions down the road. And Counselor Cassett, your comment is exactly right. It would be good, this is possible, to get a schematic to say, this is the roadmap of Munis. HR, we have the HR module. Within HR, we do hiring, we do payroll, but the time and record keeping comes from Kronos. You didn't know that, or you thought, well, maybe you did, but you probably just assumed that that's already in Munis. It's not. Oh, we need to have an API to connect that, right? So that's going to eliminate any wage or labor time compliance issues, right? Because it's automatic. So it's those kind of things to set back to say, okay, and that's the power of technology. Technology is the enabler, right? As an ERP to say, let's modernize these areas. Let's do that. We don't need to do that. That's not critical. Or we have the utility billing system is going to do that. So let's make sure that that's integrated, and that is going to flow exactly into the trial balance so that the financials can be booked properly, right? That's why finance needs to know exactly, right? They need to be connected with the IT to know exactly how it works and how it needs to be mapped. That's why when cash was implemented, it was mapped. Everything was aggregated. Everything was aggregated. All the bank accounts were aggregated into one. So it's not a one. The process of reconciling that is still a challenge, right? That's why it's number one priority after the upgrade to say, okay, let's fix the mapping in Munis so it can be one-to-one. So when things are paid out of the Wells Fargo and we get the bank statement from Wells Fargo, it's a one-to-one match in Tyler Munis, and it's just boom, you push a button, it reconciles, it kicks out just, a couple of exceptions or whatever. And so you're being proactive, and you're only having to review the exceptions versus actually doing it all manually, which is what the finance department has to do now. So.
And on the subject of cash and the aggregation of cash, I want to add to that the banking structure also impacts that. And when I worked at the State Department of Finance and Administration, about 6 years into their ERP system, which is called Share, it's a PeopleSoft-based system, there were similar issues with the bank structure. So it's not just the way it's set up in Munis and mapped, the bank account structure itself is also a factor. And, these are problems that many entities face on the implementation of an ERP system. Some of the legacy operational ways of doing things, for example, having bank accounts with pooled cash from many different sources, those behaviors have to change in order to use the technology from the technology. I can speak to having done it at another entity. It's very possible. Part of the implementation of an ERP system.
Okay, and I guess just one other thing. So, you started your report with the McCard report. The McCard report, I didn't have time today to dig my copy out. Very specifically talks about the enormity of the work that needs to happen here to modernize the city, because we haven't kept up with the modern world. And it talks about, you can't do all this at once, and you're going to have to kind of do this in phases. And so I think it would be instructive for you to help us understand, again, without going down a huge rabbit hole, but just, or maybe confirm that that's exactly part of the issue, is that you can't just flip a switch and it's all done. It's even when we're talking about computers, and that soft grade upgrades and soft grade implementation and then getting it all to talk to each other at the scale that we're talking about here at the city, after many, many years of not keeping up, is enormous. And that's part of our problem.
No, that's exactly. It is a huge undertaking to this magnitude. to just, first of all, implement an ERP. First decide from a business case, how are you going to use the ERP? Then design the processes around that with proper internal controls is the first step. Then you say, okay, let's add more bells and whistles or mod on or upgrade or integrate, right? Like the challenge that the city has had over the last 4 years. And, the city owes a debt of gratitude to the former finance director for carrying this project, right? And moving forward, even though it was painful. We were still, operating at a 40% vacancy. We had the pandemic. I mean, it was a lot. It was a lot, but we still said we must do this. And the McCard report confirmed it, that said, if you don't, right, if you stay on the old JD Edwards E1, right, we were up against that system was completely out of date and not filling the needs and not achieving the goal of the administration that said, we need to modernize city government. And it is a process. But it's a process that it's a collaborative process. And every component of IT, and this is just my perspective because I am, I've been doing this for 36 years as an accountant, consultant, in internal audit, world-class at Deloitte, and then I own a software company. Technology is so integral to the finance and accounting organization. And that's why I say technology is the enabler. And both organizations have to literally be attached at the hip, right? In terms of how it impacts, right? It's not, you can't do this in a silo or with blinders on because it is so critical. That's why with this upgrade, like I said, it is a heavy lift going 8 versions, but the city doesn't have a choice because Tyler is sunsetting the old version. And we're one of, I think, 300 other municipalities in that bucket, right? Dealing with the same challenges. So yes, McCard said you must do this, but you have to do it in a way. If you do it too fast, you're going to fail. If you don't do it, you're going to fail. So it is something, like I said, I give the former director credit for pushing forward, even though, the first thing as part of that system was implementing, and Carolyn, you'll know this, remember the 3-way match? The pushback, this was I remember my very first month, the pushback, why do we got to do this? I don't want to do this. This creates work. I don't want to have to do a 3-way match. And we're like, well, you have to, like, this is a proper way to, take a PO, match it, ensure it's approved, right? To push those segregation of duties and proper internal controls through the system. So as Director Oster said, this is a change management process. This is behavioral, right? So that took what, a year and a half, just to get the department's buy-in to just understand it, to really, really stop bitching that they had to do it or they had to change their processes versus having one person just do it all, right? Because that opens yourself up for fraud. If somebody has complete control, and that was another thing that McCard had talked about, right? So all of these things, like I said, I give the former, director of finance credit for pushing forward, even though we were pushing this uphill with not a lot of support. So, moving forward, this department needs your continued support so that they can be successful.
Yep.
And like I said, the politics and the rhetoric outside has just got to stop. It's just got to stop.
Yep. Yeah. And I think there's a lot of work to be done, and there's a lot of oversight that this committee will continue to be looking into, as I think Counselor Cassett identified some things that we can get some updates. I think Counselor Lindell also suggested that. Director Oster, I just want to give you like we do need to kind of wrap up our meeting tonight, but just want to give you a moment to also weigh in on that.
Madam Chair, thank you. And thank you, counselors. I would like to take that time to thank Stephanie for her hard work and her dedication to the city. In addition to this project, she's been, a supporter of the city in many ways, serving on the audit committee, as she mentioned, as a volunteer for a number of years. And I will say that this process that we've gone through as we've worked on this report together has helped me learn more about the city in a very short time. It's been extremely helpful for me, and just really want to express my gratitude to Stephanie. And, I think that the collaboration and the partnership between IT, finance, and HR, and all divisions of the city is essential, and that communication is critical. And I am very excited to work with my colleagues in other divisions throughout the city as we continue to grow our use of the Munis system and integrate with these other systems.
Yeah, thank you. And I also where I started was again, thank you, Stephanie, for sticking out and really all the different levels of service you've given the city in your tenure here. So thank you. Okay, I think we're going to move on. We just have a couple more things to get through. We are going to go. We don't have action items for discussion. We do have introduction of legislation. Hold on, let me read this. We are introducing a resolution establishing City of Santa Fe's priorities for consideration by the New Mexico State Legislature during the 56th Legislature, State of New Mexico, first session 2023. Again, this is just the introduction of this bill. It is scheduled for finance. Oh, let's see, it's scheduled for quality of life on October 19th, going to Public Works and Utilities on October 24th, coming back here to finance on October 31st, and then to governing body on November 9th. So let's consider that introduced. We do not have an executive session. Matters from staff.
Madam Chair, there are no matters from staff.
All right, matters from the committee. Councilor Rivera.
So the item that you just read into legislation looks like it's approved. So I don't know if that needs to be removed or if it's okay to say approve the meeting information as presented. That may be confusing.
I don't see that. Where are you seeing that?
Right underneath it, or everything we approve as an approved underneath it.
Oh. Yeah, all right. So it wasn't approved. Let's just do whatever needs to happen to show that it was only introduced.
And then I asked a couple meetings ago about an update to the radio information and where it was at. My understanding, it was at the city manager's office. Is it still there, or?
Madam Chair and Councilor Rivera, I did receive an update on that earlier today, and I understand that the review is in the final stages, so we should be able to get you that information very soon.
And Madam Chair, I don't know if you want it presented to the whole committee or if.
Yeah, I thought what we do, I haven't seen that either. I thought I'd once they get that information out, you and I can visit about what you'd like to see happen with it. So I've just been waiting for the same information you have been, and then we'll figure out how best to go forward with it.
Thank you.
All right, other matters from the committee? Matters from the chair. Our next meeting is Monday, October 31st, Halloween. Thank you, everyone. Really appreciate the questions and our work tonight.